My billionaire husband forgot to hang up the call, and I heard him laugh. Janet, she's the perfect camouflage. Boring, safe, and completely clueless. But once the merger signs in June, the camouflage comes off. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below, letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that I didn't move. I didn't gasp. My hand stayed perfectly still against the cool marble countertop of our penthouse kitchen, phone pressed to my ear like it had fused there. Mikkel's voice carried through the speaker again, casual, almost amused. Her father-in-law thinks I'm the second coming of Warren Buffett. The press eats up the family man angle, but honestly, she's just good optics. The other voice, his COO Marcus, responded with a knowing chuckle. I could picture the Scotch glasses, the leather chairs in his private jet cabin. So you're riding this out until the Zenith deal closes? There was a pause. Then Mikkel answered with the kind of certainty he used in boardroom presentations. 6 months, maybe less if the regulators move faster. I'll have everything locked in by June. She won't even see the divorce coming. Too busy playing the perfect corporate wife. I ended the call. My finger found the red button without looking. That numbness would crack later, violently. But in that frozen moment, I stared at my reflection in the darkened window overlooking the city. 43 floors below, people were living real lives. Up here, I'd been living a performance I didn't know I'd auditioned for. 3 years of marriage collapsed like a controlled demolition. Every charity gala where he'd squeezed my hand for the cameras. Every investor dinner where I'd laughed at his rehearsed anecdotes about how we met. Every morning he'd kiss my forehead and told me I made him better. Now I understood. I made him marketable. I walked to our bedroom, past the hallway lined with photographs his publicist had professionally framed. There was one from our wedding in the Maldives, both of us barefoot in the sand, my head thrown back in laughter. I used to think that moment captured joy. Now I saw what it really was. The launch of his rebranding campaign. Mikkel Skinner, the ruthless corporate raider with a reputation for crushing competitors, suddenly softened by love. Suddenly trustworthy enough for the kind of mega merger that required regulatory approval and public goodwill. I remembered how fast everything moved after we met at that Columbia Business School alumni mixer. 3 months from introduction to engagement. He'd charmed everyone. My colleagues said I'd won the lottery. Forbes called us the power couple redefining modern entrepreneurship. My own mother cried happy tears, saying, "He looks at you like you hung the moon." Did he? Or did he see the former nonprofit director with impeccable credentials and zero scandals who could humanize? A billionaire the Wall Street Journal had once called ethically flexible. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay 12 inches from the man who just confirmed I was a line item in his strategic plan, filed somewhere between crisis PR and corporate restructuring. His breathing stayed deep and even. The sleep of someone with a clear conscience, or no conscience at all. I stared at the ceiling, listening to that breathing, and felt the suffocating weight of being someone's calculated investment. The next morning, I woke at 6 like always. Made his coffee, 2 shots of espresso with oat milk, exactly how he liked it. He came down in his Tom Ford suit, the navy one he wore for important meetings. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my temple like he'd done 1,000 times before. His hand lingered on my waist. "Sleep well?" I smiled, handing him the mug. "Like the dead. You?" He grinned, scrolling through his phone with his free hand. "Out cold. Big day. The Zenith lawyers are flying in for preliminary signatures." I watched him closely now, studying the performance I'd mistaken for intimacy, the way he checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, how he straightened his tie with the precision of someone preparing for a stage entrance. "Nervous?" I asked. He looked at me then, and for a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or assessment. Then he smiled, the one that had landed him on magazine covers. "With you in my corner? Never." When the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. Tears would come later, in unexpected waves that would knock me sideways in grocery store aisles and during morning showers. But in that moment, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I titled it Due Diligence, because if Mikkel Skinner had taught me anything during our marriage, it was that you don't go into battle without documentation. I typed out everything I'd heard on that call, word for word, time-stamped and detailed. Not for a lawyer, not yet, for me. Because I knew there would be moments ahead when I'd doubt my own memory. When his charm would almost convince me I'd misunderstood, when staying would feel easier than fighting. That note would be my tether to reality. That afternoon, I drove halfway to my parents' house in Connecticut, then pulled over at a rest stop and sat with the engine running. I couldn't tell them, not yet. My father, who'd been skeptical of Mikkel's too-perfect courtship, would demand I leave immediately. My mother would cry and blame herself for encouraging the marriage. And I couldn't carry their heartbreak when I was still trying to understand the dimensions of my own. I turned the car around and went home. Lit his favorite candle, the one that cost $200 and smelled like Nordic forest. Put on the playlist he made me during our honeymoon. Started dinner, the Chilean sea bass he'd complimented last month. When he walked through the door at 7:30, his face softened into that expression I'd once thought was love. "God, it smells incredible in here. What did I do to deserve you?" I smiled, pulling plates from the cabinet. "Just lucky, I guess." That night, we ate together at the dining table he'd had custom-made from reclaimed wood, discussing his day like we always did. He told me about the merger timeline, about the regulatory hurdles, about how critical the next 6 months would be for his legacy. I nodded in all the right places, asked thoughtful questions, touched his hand across the table. And the entire time, I was thinking, you have no idea who you married. You think I'm camouflage. But camouflage doesn't just blend in, Mikkel. It hides what's underneath until the moment it strikes. The city glowed beneath the glass, like something expensive and unreachable. A constellation of people who thought their lives were real. Janet watched them from 43 floors up, her forehead almost touching the penthouse window, her reflection hovering over the skyline like a ghost. The woman in the glass wore a silk camisole and a delicate diamond pendant, the one Mikkel had given her after a brutal news cycle, joking that every PR storm deserved a little weather insurance. She'd laughed then. Now the memory scraped. She studied the details she used to admire, the smooth line of her blowout, the discreet sparkle of the earrings a luxury magazine once called effortlessly elegant, the tasteful smear of nude lipstick his stylist said photographed well. None of it felt like hers. Every gift, every gown, every carefully orchestrated vacation spread across glossy pages, flickered through her mind in a brutal slideshow. Not romance. Maintenance costs, brand upkeep, image polish on the asset called wife. The word hit harder than his voice on the call. Wife. She thought of the way he introduced her at events. My better half, the reason I remember what really matters. The crowd would give that soft, approving laugh people reserve for billionaires who appear humble. She used to feel proud then, warmed by the idea that she anchored him. Now she saw the script. The way his hand settled on her waist at the perfect angle for cameras, The way he positioned her beside him like a luxury watch, a subtle signal that he could afford the best. The phone lay on the console table behind her, screen dark, his name still at the top of her recent calls. She didn't look at it. Looking meant replaying the words, and she didn't need to. They were etched now, carved into the inside of her skull. Perfect camouflage. Clueless. The moment the merger signs in June, the camouflage comes off. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. Tears would make this about heartbreak, and heartbreak implied something mutual had broken. This felt cleaner, colder, a miscalculation finally revealing itself on the balance sheet. She straightened slowly, watching the woman in the glass pull her shoulders back. The wife role had a clear set of expectations: smile, support, smooth the edges of his genius. A liability, though, Janet realized. A liability had power. A liability could tank numbers, shatter confidence, scare investors. A liability could not be ignored. Somewhere far below, a siren wailed, thin and distant. Up here, the silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. Janet let it settle over her like armor. If he had turned her into a line item, she would become the one he hadn't accounted for. She stepped away from the window, leaving the city lights and her old reflection behind. The gold cage had never looked more beautiful. It had also never felt more flammable. The alarm hummed at 6, soft and insistent. Janet reached over and silenced it before it could wake Mikkel, her hand moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual 1,000 mornings. She slipped out of bed, bare feet silent on the heated marble floor, and caught a glimpse of him still sleeping. His face looked younger in the dim light, almost vulnerable, the kind of image his publicist would kill for. Authentic billionaire at rest. She felt nothing. The coffee maker whirred to life in the kitchen, filling the penthouse with the rich smell he associated with productivity. She made his exactly how he liked it. 2 shots of espresso with oat milk, and set it on the counter beside the Wall Street Journal she'd retrieved from outside. Then she waited, leaning against the island, rehearsing her lines. He appeared 20 minutes later, hair still damp from the shower, wearing the charcoal suit that made him look like he'd walked off a Forbes cover. "Morning, beautiful," he said, reaching for the coffee. His smile was easy, automatic, the same one he used in investor calls. She returned it, stepping closer to adjust his collar, even though it didn't need adjusting. "Big meeting today?" she asked, her voice warm, interested, exactly what a supportive wife should sound like. "Zenith's board at 10. Should be straightforward." He took a sip, eyes already drifting to his phone. "You're amazing, you know that?" "Just taking care of my favorite person," she said, letting her hand linger on his chest. The words tasted like metal, but she kept her expression soft. He glanced up then, checking his reflection in the window behind her. She watched him do it, the subtle tilt of his chin, the way he smoothed his tie and squared his shoulders. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the version of himself he needed to sell today. Powerful, grounded, the kind of man whose beautiful wife made him coffee and straightened his collar. The man regulators could trust with a multi-billion-dollar merger. His eyes were empty when they met hers again, pleasant but flat, like he was reading cue cards only he could see. "What would I do without you?" The question hung between them, rhetorical, requiring no real answer. She smiled anyway. "Guess we'll never find out." He kissed her forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. She watched him leave, counting his steps, noticing how he checked his reflection one more time in the hallway mirror before disappearing. The performance never stopped. Not for her. Not for anyone. It was just a script he read flawlessly, day after day, and she'd mistaken repetition for devotion. The door closed with a soft click. Janet poured his untouched coffee down the sink and watched it swirl away, dark and bitter. Then she went to find his laptop. His laptop sat on the desk in his home office, screen still glowing, cursor blinking in a half-finished email. Janet stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, the picture of casual domesticity. He'd left in such a rush he hadn't even locked it. 3 years of marriage, and he'd never once considered she might look. Why would he? She was boring, safe, completely clueless. She crossed the room and sat in his chair, the leather still warm. The email on screen was mundane, something about quarterly projections. But the browser tabs told a different story. She clicked through them slowly, methodically, her journalism degree from Columbia finally useful again. Financial models, merger timelines, confidential memos marked with red internal-only headers. He'd been sloppy, or maybe just arrogant, the kind of arrogance that came from never being challenged. The first folder she opened was labeled Zenith Integration. Inside, spreadsheets stretched into hundreds of rows, projections that promised shareholders a 30% return within 18 months. She scrolled down, scanning for inconsistencies, and found them buried in footnotes and formulas that assumed best-case scenarios on every front. Aggressive didn't begin to cover it. These numbers required perfection, the kind of perfection that didn't exist in real markets. She opened another file, this one an email chain between Mikkel and his CFO. The subject line read, Expedited Approval Strategy. Her pulse quickened as she read. They were discussing ways to fast-track regulatory review, floating the idea of emphasizing Mikkel's stable family life and commitment to ethical leadership in their public filings. There was a line that made her breath catch. Janet's nonprofit background gives us credibility with the progressive wing of the board. Play that up in the hearing. She'd been a prop, a bullet point in a strategy deck. His phone lay face up on the desk, unlocked, notifications piling up. She picked it up, thumb hovering over his messages. There were texts from Marcus, his COO, casual and frequent. One from this morning. Board's going to love the family man angle. You nailed the casting. Another from last week. Remind me again why you married her? Oh, right. The optics. Worth it? Mikkel had replied with a single emoji. A laughing face. Janet set the phone down carefully, her hand steady even as something hot and sharp twisted in her chest. She opened her own phone and started taking pictures, screenshot after screenshot, every incriminating file and careless message. She worked quickly, aware that he could call, could decide to turn around, could catch her in the act. But he wouldn't. He'd underestimated her from the beginning. She saved everything to an encrypted cloud folder labeled Insurance. Then she closed the laptop, leaving it exactly as she'd found it, and walked out. The audit had just begun. The investor cocktail reception wasn't important, just a minor networking event at the Harvard Club, the kind Mikkel usually handled solo. But he'd asked her to come last minute. Something about showing face before the bigger events rolled out. Janet had smiled and said of course, then deliberately chosen the wrong dress. She appeared in the bedroom doorway, wearing crimson silk, fitted and striking, the kind of dress that demanded attention. His eye swept over her once, then again, and she watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. That's what you're wearing? You don't like it? She smoothed the fabric over her hips, feigning innocence. I thought it was elegant. It's too much. His voice stayed level, controlled, but something flickered beneath it. This isn't the Met Gala, Janet. It's a quiet networking thing, subdued, professional. He gestured toward her closet, the navy one, or the beige. She tilted her head, letting a small crease form between her brows. I don't think I packed those back from the dry cleaner. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at her, calculating whether this was worth the fight. Fine. Just keep it low-key tonight, okay? No controversial topics. They arrived 20 minutes late, which she knew he hated. The room was filled with the usual crowd, venture capitalists and hedge fund managers pretending small talk wasn't transactional. Mikkel's hand found the small of her back, guiding her through introductions, his smile bright and practiced. She played along for the first hour, nodding politely, laughing at mediocre jokes, performing exactly as expected. Then she saw her opening. A senior partner from a firm considering the Zenith merger was discussing market volatility. Mikkel was mid-sentence about calculated risk management, when Janet leaned in, voice just loud enough to carry. Though I suppose calculated risk is just a nicer way of saying aggressive gambling, isn't it? The group went quiet. Mikkel's hand tightened on his glass, knuckles whitening. His smile stayed fixed, but his eyes cut toward her, sharp and cold. Janet's always had a unique perspective on business strategy. She laughed lightly. I just think transparency matters, especially when other people's money is involved. The partner chuckled awkwardly, sensing tension. Mikkel excused them smoothly, his hand moving from her back to her elbow, fingers digging in just enough to sting as he steered her toward the bar. What the hell was that? His voice was low, controlled, but she heard the rage underneath, saw it in the tight line of his mouth. Just making conversation, she said, meeting his eyes. Isn't that what you brought me for? His mask cracked completely then, just for a second. Pure fury flickered across his face before he locked it down again, forced his features back into something resembling calm. We're leaving. She'd found exactly what she needed. Proof that his control was an illusion, fragile and breakable. Proof that she terrified him. The second time she went into his office, she didn't bother pretending she was just dropping off coffee. The performance was for him. The truth was for her. She closed the door behind her, listening for the soft click, then crossed to the desk. His laptop waited, lid shut, a sleek, expensive secret. She opened it. No password prompt, of course. In his mind, the only threats wore suits and carried subpoenas, not silk robes and wedding rings. She moved faster now, no longer just collecting proof of his contempt, but hunting. The Zenith integration folder sat where she'd left it, smug and untouched. She dug deeper this time, past the glossy presentations, into the raw files beneath. Hidden behind a string of numbers was a subfolder labeled ADG Models. Another inside that. Internal eyes only. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Spreadsheets opened, one after another. She knew real numbers. She'd built budgets from scraps in her nonprofit days, stretched grant money farther than anyone thought possible. These numbers were different. Revenue projections inflated beyond reason. Losses quietly reclassified as one-time anomalies. A separate tab showed the public figures, neatly sanitized. Next to it, the internal figures, messy and brutal. The delta between them made her stomach turn. She clicked into an email chain attached to the file. Mikkel, the CFO, Marcus. They weren't just optimistic. They were manufacturing reality. We'll clean this up post-merger, one message read. By then, market confidence will be too high to shake. Another, regulators only see what we file. Keep the story tight. Skinner's track record will carry us. Her cursor hovered over an attachment flagged by a legal disclaimer. A draft statement for the SEC, already polished, filled with phrases like conservative reporting and robust transparency. She reread those words while staring at the internal spreadsheet that contradicted every line. This wasn't aggressive spin. It was fraud. The realization landed with a cold, precise weight. If this leaked, Mikkel wouldn't just face a messy divorce and a bruised ego. He'd be signing up for investigations, hearings, maybe handcuffs. His entire empire, built on the illusion of genius and control, would suddenly look exactly like what it was. A gamble disguised as certainty. Janet opened her phone and started again. Screenshots, file exports. She uploaded everything to the encrypted folder she'd named Insurance, then created a new one and labeled it more honestly, Detonation. She backed it up 3 different ways, spreading his secrets across clouds and drives he would never think to search. For a moment, she just sat there, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, staring at his name in the email headers. Mikkel Skinner, CC'd on every falsified model, every dishonest projection. He had turned her into camouflage. In doing so, he'd given her unrestricted access to the one thing that could destroy him. She closed the laptop and smoothed the desk pad, erasing any trace she'd been there. When she stepped out of the office, the penthouse looked exactly the same. But the balance of power had shifted. He thought he'd married a shield. What he'd actually brought into his home was a walking, breathing audit. And now she had his ace card in her pocket. The dress arrived in a garment bag the size of a small closet, hand-delivered by a stylist who spoke in words like iconic and timeless. Janet stood on the platform in front of the bedroom mirror, while pins flashed around her like tiny blades. Mikkel watched from the armchair, tie loosened, phone in hand, gaze flicking between her reflection and his emails. "This is the one," the stylist said, stepping back. "Old Hollywood, but modern. Perfect for the announcement. Perfect for the narrative," Mikkel corrected, eyes finally lifting to meet Janet's in the mirror. Strong, grounded, the woman behind the man. He smiled, like it was a compliment. Later, when the stylist left and the garment bag was zipped and hanging like a promise on the closet door, he called her into his office. The screens on his desk glowed with draft press releases and run-of-show documents. A schedule for the gala sat printed and highlighted, every minute accounted for. "Okay," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Let's walk through tomorrow." His tone was brisk, the same one he used with his executive team. Husband had clocked out. CEO was in. He slid a sheet of paper toward her, bullet points neatly spaced. "These are your talking points if anyone from the press pulls you aside. Nothing formal, just quotes they can sprinkle into coverage. Human interest, but polished." She scanned the lines. "I've watched Mikkel grow not just as a businessman, but as a person. His integrity is why I fell in love with him. We talk every night about the kind of legacy we want to leave." The words blurred for a second, then snapped back into focus. Integrity, legacy, love. Each one felt like a lit match held to dry kindling. "You don't have to memorize them," he said, misreading her silence. "Just get the sentiment. Warm, grounded, grateful. You're proud of me, proud of what we're building. That kind of thing." Her lips curved. "I am very clear on the sentiment." He leaned back, satisfied. "Good. And during the keynote, I'll mention you by name. Talk about how you kept me centered. You just smile from the table, maybe squeeze my hand when I sit back down. Cameras eat that up." And if someone asks about the strain, she said lightly. All the late nights, the travel? He considered. You say, every big dream requires sacrifice, but Mikkel never sacrifices what matters most. He watched her, waiting for the line to land. You like that? It's perfect, she said, and it was in its way. A clean lie wrapped around a dirty truth. He stood, came around the desk, and kissed the top of her head. I knew I married the right woman. Tomorrow is huge for us, Janet. Zenith changes everything. She looked up at him, letting admiration soften her features. The perfect, devoted expression he expected. I know, she said. I've never been more sure of what tomorrow means. He smiled, reassured, and went back to his screens, already half absorbed in numbers and headlines that hadn't printed yet. Janet folded the talking points sheet in half, then in half again, until the paper was a small, dense square in her palm. She slipped it into her pocket like a prop she might or might not use. In her head, a different script was already writing itself. One where she didn't praise his integrity, but priced it. One where the legacy he was so desperate to protect became her leverage. He was staging the night as his coronation. She smiled as he outlined every beat of the performance, nodding in all the right places. He had no idea he was also planning the scene of his own undoing. The limousine smelled like leather and expensive cologne, the partition up, the world outside reduced to streaks of light and shadow. Mikkel adjusted his cufflinks, checked his watch, then glanced at her with that familiar look of approval. She'd worn the dress perfectly, hair swept into an elegant chignon, makeup flawless, the ideal accessory. You look incredible, he said, reaching for her hand. Ready? Janet let him take it, felt his fingers close around hers, warm and confident. Then she pulled away and opened her clutch. His brow furrowed just slightly as she withdrew a slim folder and set it on the seat between them. What's that? Your merger, she said evenly. Or more accurately, the fiction you're selling as your merger. The smile didn't leave his face immediately. It flickered first, uncertain, like he was waiting for the punchline. Janet, we're 10 minutes out. This isn't the time for... I heard the call, Mikkel. Her voice cut through his, clean and cold. 3 weeks ago. You forgot to hang up. You told Marcus I was perfect camouflage. Boring, safe, completely clueless. She watched his face drain of color. You said the camouflage comes off in June. His mouth opened, then closed. The polished executive vanished, replaced by something rawer, panicked. Janet, listen, that was... I didn't mean it like that. It was locker room talk, just blowing off steam. Don't. She held up a hand. I'm not here for the apology you're workshopping in your head. I'm here to show you what the clueless camouflage found while you were underestimating her. She opened the folder. Inside, printouts of spreadsheets, highlighted sections showing the delta between his public projections and internal reality. Email chains where he and his team discussed burying losses and inflating revenue. The SEC draft statement sitting beside the numbers that proved every word of it was a lie. His eyes scanned the pages, and she watched him understand. Not just that she knew about the divorce, that she knew about everything. Where did you... His voice cracked. You went through my files? You left the door unlocked, she said, literally and figuratively. Turns out boring wives have a lot of free time. I used mine to audit my husband. He lunged for the folder. She pulled it back, calm, deliberate. This is a copy, Mikkel. I have the originals in 3 separate cloud accounts you'll never access. I also have a very detailed letter drafted to the SEC, the Wall Street Journal, and your board of directors. The limousine slowed. Through the tinted windows, she could see the red carpet, photographers gathering like sharks. What do you want? His voice was barely a whisper. She leaned in close, her lips near his ear. I'm not the camouflage, Mikkel. I'm the landmine. And you just stepped on me. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a flush of rage. You're bluffing. You send that to the SEC, you destroy yourself too. The lifestyle, the money, everything you've gotten used to. Everything you gave me as maintenance costs? Janet's voice stayed level, surgical. I never wanted your money, Mikkel. I wanted a marriage. You made sure I didn't have one. He shifted tactics, leaning forward, hands open in a gesture that might have looked like pleading if his eyes weren't calculating angles. Janet, listen to me. We can fix this. Couples therapy, a real fresh start. I'll cancel the divorce plans. We can make this work. You're still performing. She cut him off. Even now, with the evidence in front of you, you think I'm an audience you can convince. She pulled a second envelope from her clutch. These are my terms, non-negotiable. His hand trembled as he took it, ripped it open. She watched his eyes scan the pages, saw them widen. 60 million. His voice cracked. That's insane. The prenup assumed good faith, she said. You committed fraud. I have documentation of falsified financial statements intended to deceive federal regulators. That makes the prenup void and makes you criminally liable. She paused. 60 million is what I'm owed for 3 years of being your unwitting accomplice. It's also a bargain compared to what you'll lose when the SEC freezes your assets. You can't. He stopped, chest heaving, sweat beading at his temples despite the limousine's perfect climate control. You're my wife. I was your employee? She corrected. You said so yourself. This is severance. Outside, camera flashes popped like distant fireworks. She could hear the muffled sounds of the crowd, the event coordinator's voice through an earpiece, someone saying, Mr. Skinner arrives in 2 minutes. The driver waited, engine idling, partition up, oblivious to the detonation happening in the back seat. Mikkel's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. I need to call my lawyer. You have 90 seconds before we're expected on that carpet, Janet said. Your lawyer can review the papers tomorrow. Tonight you sign, or I walk straight to the Wall Street Journal reporter standing near the check-in table. Her name is Melissa Chen. She's been investigating corporate merger fraud for 6 months. I checked. His face went gray. Janet, please. 70 million, she said calmly. You just cost yourself 10 for wasting my time. He stared at her like she'd become someone he didn't recognize. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd always been this person, just buried under the version of herself he'd needed her to be. Pen's in the folder, she said. His hand found it. For a long moment he just sat there, tuxedo jacket creased, hair slightly disheveled. The perfect image of control shattered. Then he pressed the papers against his knee and signed, his signature a jagged slash across the bottom of each page. She took them, folded them carefully, and slipped them back into her clutch. The announcement tonight goes as planned. You smile, I smile. Monday morning, I file. You don't contest, you don't speak to the press about me, and the SEC never sees what I found. The door opened. A valet stood waiting, red carpet stretching behind him like a tongue. Mr. and Mrs. Skinner, the coordinator's voice chirped through the night. You're on. Janet stepped out first, her smile bright and practiced. Mikkel followed, his hand finding her waist on autopilot, his face arranging itself into something that might pass for confidence under the camera flashes. No one in the crowd could see that the man in the immaculate tuxedo was drowning. The red carpet unfurled in front of them, like a runway to a life she no longer intended to live. Flashbulbs erupted the moment the door opened, a chain reaction of light and shouts. "Janet, over here! Mikkel, look this way!" She stepped out first, letting the cameras drink in the dress, the diamonds, the serene curve of her smile. For the first time since marrying him, she understood how much power there was in being watched. Mikkel joined her, hands slipping to her waist, grip a fraction too tight. To the cameras, he looked like every magazine cover version of himself. Composed, commanding, victorious. Up close, she saw the tremor in his fingers, the sheen of sweat at his hairline, the way his eyes darted too quickly between the photographers and the entrance. Terror, dressed in borrowed confidence. They paused at the step and repeat, angled their bodies, practiced. She tilted her head toward his shoulder, eyes soft, the image of devotion. He leaned in and whispered, "Remember the talking points?" She kept her smile. "I remember everything." A reporter called her name. "Janet, how does it feel to be here tonight on the brink of what might be the biggest merger of the decade?" She met the reporter's gaze and let a genuine warmth slip into her voice, but not for him, for herself. "It feels like a turning point," she said, "for a lot of people who don't even realize yet how much their lives are about to change." The reporter nodded, satisfied, hearing only what she expected. Mikkel exhaled, one small crisis averted. They moved inside, through chandeliers and champagne flutes and a ballroom full of people betting on his invincibility. Janet played her part to the end, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm when he spoke, shimmering under the lights like the crown jewel of his empire. The next morning, the dress hung lifeless on the back of a chair, a shed skin. Janet sat at her kitchen table in jeans and a t-shirt, hair in a knot, laptop open. The settlement papers lay beside her, copies already scanned and backed up. She filled out the online filing for divorce with the same steady precision she'd once used to write grant proposals. Under reason, she typed, "Irreconcilable differences." She clicked submit. The confirmation email pinged her inbox a second later, tidy and anticlimactic. The end of a marriage, delivered like a shipping notification. Weeks slid forward. Headlines bloomed, at first about the flawless gala and the visionary merger, then about market turbulence, then about irregularities in Zenith's disclosed data. Journalists started asking harder questions. Analysts whispered about overvaluation. Mikkel's stock dipped, then dipped again. The line on the chart no longer a clean ascent, but a jagged, nervous descent. The phrase, "too aggressive," began to appear next to his name. No one had the full story. They didn't need it. Cracks were enough. Janet watched from a small shared workspace in Brooklyn, a rented desk among other early-stage founders. The logo for her new venture glowed on her laptop screen. A fund and accelerator for women building businesses outside the old boys club. She sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, listening to a young founder explain her pitch deck, nodding, asking sharper questions than any investor had ever asked her. When investors asked about Janet's background now, she told them the truth in the broad strokes. Former nonprofit director, experience with large-scale capital, intimate understanding of how power moved behind closed doors. She did not mention the penthouse. She did not mention the man, Who'd thought she was just camouflage? One afternoon, a news alert flashed on her phone. Skinner Holdings faces increased scrutiny amid merger concerns. Below it, a photo from the gala. Mikkel in his tuxedo, jaw clenched just a little too tight, and Janet at his side, radiant. She studied her own face in the picture. The smile looked real, even now. Maybe it was. It was the smile of someone who already knew she was walking away. Janet locked her phone and turned back to the whiteboard where a young founder was sketching out projections. "Okay," she said, picking up a marker, energy humming in her veins. "Let's make sure your numbers are honest and still terrifyingly impressive." The room laughed. Outside, the market continued to churn. Empires rose and trembled. Inside, she built something cleaner, sharper, entirely her own. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.